The grit of Coldwater Ridge coated everything, a scarlet powder clinging like stubborn rust, leaching the harsh afternoon sun to a jaundiced haze. Hannah Miller's heart clenched tight as the fist holding her half-straightened bonnet ribbon froze mid-stride. A memory surfaced. Her father gone these 10 years, a small-town printer crushed defending truth against a powerful man's lies. He'd quietly stated, "Truth is a heavy stone, Hannah, but it's the only one that builds a lasting foundation." That imagined foundation crumbled now as Senator Aldous Crane, with shocking public brutality, backhanded Mr. Abernathy to the dusty ground outside the church hall. A gunshot cracked moments before, deliberately fired near Abernathy's head. Perhaps this clarifies our arrangement. Crane announced, voice-carrying with practiced authority. His polished boot pressed mercilessly against the farmer's chest. Abernathy struggled, spitting dust and blood. "Your signature or your land in ashes by week's end. Your choice." Abernathy looked up with raw desperation. "Senator, please, the creek access is vital. My livestock, my family. Progress waits for no man." And Abernathy, Crane's pistol remained casually lethally visible. "The railroad comes through with or without your cooperation." The crowd watched, paralyzed settlers, merchants, ranch hands, their faces a mixture of fear and impotence. Crane stood with the predatory stillness of a viper, coiled to strike politicians' smile, entirely absent. His pale eyes, sharp as shards of winter ice on a frozen river, held no empathy. Only glacial calculation. That unguarded glimpse of granite beneath the polish sent a tangible shiver down Hannah's spine. As he holstered his weapon, his gaze swept the crowd, brushing past her, then returning lingering, a fraction too long. A flicker of sharp assessment, like a hawk judging vulnerable prey, made her heart hammer. He noticed me watching. He saw my disgust. The thought sparked unease, deeper, more personal than the farmer's public humiliation. He forced a smile that never reached those frigid eyes as they narrowed slightly. "Miss Miller," he acknowledged with a curt tip of his hat. "I trust our esteemed schoolteacher isn't too disturbed by necessary territorial negotiations." The question felt weighted, less inquiry, more subtle warning. Before she could stammer a response, he turned, voice transforming instantly into commanding leadership. "Now then, let us proceed with today's celebration of progress. The future awaits inside." Inside the packed hall, air hung thick with pipe smoke, sweat, spilled whiskey, and a fear so dense it felt like another presence. Hannah, serving lukewarm lemonade and dry cakes, felt adrift in the raw, masculine energy. Witnessing Crane's casual cruelty had curdled the mayor's booming words about her vital part. Nearness to such power felt suffocating, like breathing poisoned air. Her plain cotton dress seemed flimsy armor against the predatory undercurrents swirling beneath the forced bonhomie. Senator Crane held court near the pulpit, silhouetted against dusty shafts of light. His voice, a finely tuned instrument, spoke of taming the land of laws, protecting families, subtly painting threats with the faces of the displaced tribes whose ancestral lands this town and Crane's railroad now aggressively occupied. The savage must give way to civilization, he proclaimed, eyes sweeping the room like a hawk assessing its domain. Briefly snagging on Hannah again, "It is God's will, manifest destiny." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hypnotized crowd. When his gaze passed Hannah once more, that assessing glint intensified, possessive, making her skin crawl. She lowered her eyes, focusing on the tray, the clink of cheap glasses, fragile against his formidable presence. Later, as the crowd thinned, but tension remained a bitter residue. Crane signaled dismissively for more lemonade. Hannah retreated to the cramped alcove behind the main hall, the rattle of ice jarring. The rough-hewn door creaked open, his shadow stretched long, eclipsing the meager light. "Ah, Miss Miller." His voice turned silken, intimate, instantly raising the hairs on her neck. "Still performing your vital service." A tight, forced smile was all she managed, turning pointedly to the pitcher, the rough wall cool against her shoulder blades, feeling utterly trapped. He stepped further in, deliberately blocking the narrow exit, the cloying scent of expensive cigars and stale whiskey enveloping her invasive. His lofty pronouncements on morality seemed a grotesque echo. His eyes lingered appraisingly down the simple lines of her dress and back up. The air grew heavy, charged with a menace that felt colder than any winter wind. "A woman of quiet dedication," he murmured, stepping closer, still crowding her until she felt the heat radiating from him. "Obedience. Such a precious virtue in these trying times." The words landed like stones, possessive, chillingly direct. "Senator," Hannah said firmly, finding a sliver of voice desperately projecting composure she didn't feel, "I really should return to my duties." Before panic could translate to flight, he moved, terrifyingly swift, brutally efficient, the civilized mask shattering completely. One strong hand clamped hard over her mouth, stifling her involuntary gasp of terror. His other arm pinned her roughly against the splintered wall. Leather and smoke filled her senses acrid. The glass pitcher crashed, lemonade pooling like spilled innocence, its sweet scent nauseatingly mingling with his expensive cologne. The world narrowed, rough wood gouging her back, suffocating pressure denying breath and voice. The absolute empty cold in his pale eyes, inches away. Violation swift, brutal, utterly silencing. Acted out with chilling, almost bored efficiency, just as quickly, abruptly, it was over. He stepped back meticulously, adjusting his waistcoat, smoothing lapels as if brushing away lint. He glanced at the shattered pitcher and spreading pool with fleeting annoyance. Then at her slumped, gasping form, with profound, dismissive contempt. "Clean this mess," he said coldly, straightening his cuffs, voice devoid of emotion, save irritation. "And remember, Miss Miller, that some private encounters are best kept that way. For everyone's sake, especially yours, best be tidy about things." Without another word, he turned sharply, stepped back into the hall instantly. The venerable statesman again leaving Hannah crumpled, gasping for air. The sticky sweetness turning cold, the stinging scent of violation burning itself indelibly into her memory and soul. Weeks blurred into a nauseating, disorienting haze. Prairie autumn colors seemed leached of life, the world viewed through a filter of shame and fear. Morning sickness became a wretched, humiliating ritual. Each heave a visceral reminder of Crane's assault. The terrible truth bloomed chilling and inescapable. Pregnant Senator Crane's child, Hannah, stared at her reflection in her small cabin's cracked mirror. Shadows deepening daily, shame warred with icy, paralyzing fear. But beneath it, deep down, an ember of defiance stubbornly glowed, fanned by growing fury. An icy fury colder than his eyes, sharp as her father's memory of defiance. This was not her shame alone. He, the moral reformer, spoke constantly of responsibility law, consequence. He would face his... "You're going to do what?" Mrs. Gable gasped, eyes wide with shock when Hannah requested extended leave. The storekeeper's wife narrowed her eyes, taking in Hannah's pallor. The subtle changes, her gaze held less concern, more sharp calculation. "Travel east alone. Now, in your delicate condition." Suspicion dripped from her words like venom. "I have urgent family business." Hannah lied, meeting the intrusive gaze with manufactured steadiness. "I'll return by spring term." The lie felt clumsy, transparent as glass. With meager savings scraped together, she bought a one-way train ticket east, then hired a horse for the grueling final leg to the territorial capital. Her body ached With unwelcome changes, the city felt vast, coldly indifferent, its grand stone buildings overwhelming. She found Crane in his opulent hotel suite, ensconced like a king surrounded by fawning aides and vast maps detailing railroad expansions slicing aggressively through tribal lands. A young officious clerk, Thomas, she recalled his face pale and nervous beneath the assumed importance, tried to block her. "Ma'am, the senator is in a crucial meeting. Tell Senator Crane that Hannah Miller from Coldwater Ridge requires 5 minutes." She interrupted, voice steadier than she felt, fueled by desperation. "It is a matter of utmost urgency." Something in her tone, or perhaps the haunted look in her eyes, made the clerk reluctantly retreat, casting a worried glance back, minutes stretched. She was ushered into Crane's private office. He dismissed aides impatiently, his smile thin as a razor strop. Public reformer vanished, replaced by cold irritation. Thomas lingered near the doorway, ostensibly arranging papers, but his tense posture and furtive glances betrayed anxious eavesdropping. Hannah stood small amidst polished mahogany and thick carpets, but held her chin high. Her voice trembled only slightly. "Senator, I am with child, your child." The words hung stark, undeniable. No shock, no denial, not even remorse. Just that same glacial appraisal. He paced like a caged wolf. "This," he stated flatly, sharp annoyance vibrating in his tone, "is profoundly inconvenient." He spoke as if discussing misplaced cargo. He stopped directly before her, invading her space voice, dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "There are procedures. Girl arrangements can be made. Certain women specialize in resolving such unfortunate complications discreetly. Of course, you will find one. You will deal with this matter immediately. Do you understand the gravity?" Thomas flinched visibly at the clipped, cruel finality of "deal." Horror washed over her, colder than a winter river, and the casual inhumanity stole her breath. She straightened instinctively, hands protectively cradling her abdomen. "No." The single word hung quiet, but utterly defiant. His expression hardened instantly, the veneer cracking completely. "Do not misunderstand me, schoolteacher," he snarled, dropping all pretense, grabbing her upper arm in a bruising grip that made her gasp. Fingers dug cruelly, branding her skin. "My work, my reputation. The entire future of this territory is paramount. Decades of careful planning. I will not allow a piece of unfortunate biology, your regrettable, naive availability, to derail everything." She wrenched free with a surge of adrenaline, stumbling back against a bookshelf filled with leather-bound laws he clearly disregarded. "I won't be silenced," she said, finding unexpected steel born of desperation and fury. "This child exists because of your actions, your violence, your choice." Dangerous fear flickered deep in Crane's eyes, quickly masked by suffocating rage. "Fix this," he hissed, leaning closer, breath foul with expensive whiskey. "Or you will simply disappear, permanently." He lowered his voice further, intimately, terrifying. "There are vast stretches of this frontier where problems, troublesome individuals, simply vanish without trace. Unfortunate accidents happen, fatal encounters with less civilized elements, perhaps the very savages you champion, are tragically common. Am I making myself absolutely clear?" He gave her a final contemptuous shove backwards. Angry red marks flared where his fingers had dug in. "Get out of my sight, and do not ever contact me again unless this problem has been resolved to my satisfaction." From the corner of her eye, Hannah saw Thomas quickly avert his gaze, his face ashen, his hand trembling as he shuffled papers. Hannah fled his venomous threats, echoing colder than the biting winter wind. She had sought some shred of justice, found only ruthless, absolute self-preservation. The long, arduous ride back was a numb blur of degradation, humiliation, and the terrifying certainty of her precarious position. His influence felt omnipresent, suffocating his words, a deferred death sentence. The answer came with terrifying swiftness. 3 days after her exhausted, fearful return, stark posters appeared overnight. Wanted Confederate spy and saboteur. Hannah Miller, known associate of subversive elements, dangerous reward offered, dead or alive. Her own crudely drawn likeness stared back. Ludicrous, the war long over. But the lie served Crane's purpose, instantly transforming her from victim to fugitive. A symbol of the chaos he claimed to fight. Whispers curdled into pointed fingers. Mrs. Gable at the store drew back sharply, avid calculation, now replacing mere suspicion in her eyes. Other customers physically shrank away. Coldwater Ridge closed ranks, the blacksmith Mr. Henderson avoided her gaze, the clang of his hammer sounding like judgment. That evening, Henderson appeared furtively at her cabin door. Hat clutched, nervously, eyes darting. "Miss Miller!" He whispered urgently, keeping his voice low. "Got kids myself, Miss Miller. Can't stand by and watch this. You need to go tonight." "Why flee? I'm innocent." "Innocent don't matter now," he interrupted brusquely. "Crane's men arrived this afternoon. Hired guns, not marshals, a hard-looking bunch. Been asking pointed questions, showing your picture their leader." Henderson swallowed visibly. Real mean-looking bastard with a jagged scar right down his face. Calls himself Cutter. Heard him tell the mayor they're here to permanently resolve the spy situation. And overheard him later grumbling to his men that Crane better make this worth his while, 'cause loose ends cost extra, and he ain't cheap. Henderson's eyes were stark with warning. "Miss Miller, I fought in the war. I know that kind of talk. It means they ain't planning on taking you alive, trial or no trial." Just then, unmistakable sounds of approaching horses cut the twilight. "Damn it, they're coming now. Go out the back, take my mare. She's tethered in the small shed behind your place. Fast and reliable. I'll try to stall them." Before she could properly thank him, he was gone. Hannah moved with instinctive panicked speed, grabbing saving sturdy clothes, her father's old heavy revolver. Checking quickly, it was loaded. A small, crudely carved wooden bird, a memento from a student, found its way into her pocket. As she slipped out the back door into encroaching darkness, shouts erupted from the front, angry demanding voices, Henderson's desperate protests. "She ain't here, left days ago." Norkovsky. Then a sickeningly sharp crack and a strangled cry of pain that turned her blood to ice. Crane's hunters, a brutal mix of hard-faced railroad enforcers, avaricious range detectives, and a core group moving with unsettling military precision. Likely veterans from his ruthless Indian war campaigns, men bound by violence and dark secrets, led by the scarred Cutter. They ransacked the small schoolhouse, first tossing slates, scarring desks. Hannah watched from deeper shadows near the woods, heart lodged painfully as they dragged a bloodied Henderson back towards her cabin, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. "Where is she?" Cutter demanded, voice rasping like stones grinding together. "Gone, told you days ago." Henderson gasped, teeth clenched. "Said she was heading east." Cutter studied the defiant face for a long moment, then smiled a terrible, predatory expression, utterly devoid of humor. "You're a piss-poor liar, old man, and lying to me." He slowly drew a long, wicked-looking knife blade, catching faint moonlight. "Well, that has consequences." Just then, Henderson's eyes caught sight of her. They widened slightly, in silent, urgent command. Or now, that night, under a sliver moon, Hannah slipped away from the burning remnants of her life. A small bundle held salvaged belongings. She rode west on Henderson's sturdy mare, pushing hard hoofbeats echoing her terrified heart. The vast, indifferent plains stretched before her, offering terrifying exposure, not solace. The chase was immediate, chillingly efficient, Crane's network wider resources, deeper than imagined. his men relentless trackers appearing like phantoms at remote crossings, lonely stage depots. News of the dangerous spy woman traveled faster, amplified by Crane's agents and the lure of reward money. Was it Mrs. Gable who pointed them this way? Or the stable hand eyeing her horse? Universal suspicion soured her thoughts. She learned the hunted's harsh curriculum, snatched moments of restless sleep under rocky overhangs, trusting no one. Reading subtle signs in disturbed dust, panicked birds, unnatural stillness, living on fear, stale water, the constant thrum of anxiety and a growing resolve, fueled by the life kicking softly within. The ambush near Willow Creek was brutal baptism. Paused cautiously to water her exhausted mare. The deceptively peaceful afternoon exploded. Bullets ripped savagely through leaves, splintering bark inches from her head with terrifying velocity. Her horse screamed, rearing, clinging low. Hannah spurred it desperately forward into the churning creek. Icy water shocked her. Bullets whined past like angry hornets, kicking up violent sprays like lethal raindrops. Instead of just fleeing downstream, she spotted a narrow game trail obscured by willows on the far bank. She guided the panicked mare towards it, letting the current help angle their escape, ducking low under the overhang of the muddy bank's roots, concealed momentarily. Gaining the slick bank, she urged the mare out, mud sucking at its hooves, and galloped wildly into dense undergrowth, just as furious shouts erupted behind them, thwarted by the unexpected maneuver. Escaped terrified, bleeding from a gash, where her leg scraped a submerged rock, knowing it temporary. Checked her revolver, comforted slightly by its weight, resolved not to be taken so easily. Betrayal tasted bitterer, sharper next time. Seeking desperate shelter from freezing plains, Rain found an isolated, rundown farmstead. Gaunt wife offered weak coffee with hesitant kindness. Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered. Huddled miserably by meager fireleg, throbbing overheard hushed, urgent words between the couple. "The reward," husband whispered eagerly. $500, Sarah, enough see us clear. Wife fretted, "But Jed, she's expectant, she looks harmless." Harmless poster says spy dangerous. Keep her comfortable till Cutter's men get here. Said their half-day's ride sent Timmy to fetch 'em when I saw her coming. As the woman reappeared, forcing a sickly smile, coaxing Hannah towards a dark cellar with false offers of warmth and dry blankets, Hannah saw calculation warring with fear in the shifty eyes. She saw Timmy, the couple's young son, nervously peering from behind a curtain, avoiding her gaze. Instinct screamed, danger. Bolted, shoving past the startled woman, smashed the nearest window pane with a wooden stool, scrambled frantically out into the blinding icy rain. "Stop her, grab her the money." The farmer bellowed as Hannah disappeared like a phantom into the howling wind. Seeking help was lethal. Trust, a luxury gone, journey pressed deeper into unforgiving territory. Desperate for water, navigating a bewildering maze of arroyos, she made a critical error, riding blindly into a narrow box canyon. Dead end loomed like a stone fist. Cutter and three grim-faced men appeared like specters at the entrance, blocking the only exit rifles raised. Sunlight glinted cruelly off Cutter's scar. The canyon walls seemed to press in, amplifying her hammering heart. "Nowhere left to run now, teacher." Cutter snarled, rifle leveled steadily, his scarred face twisted into a cruel, triumphant smile. "Senator sends his final regards." He sneered. "Made this personal, leading us such a merry chase, costing good men." "What did he promise you?" "Cutter." Hannah called out, voice surprisingly steady, playing desperately for time, scanning the canyon walls for any advantage. Her eyes locked on a patch of loose scree high on the wall opposite Cutter's men. "More blood money land he stole." "Does it include murdering a pregnant woman in cold blood?" Her hand moved almost imperceptibly towards the revolver tucked in her waistband. His smile widened, showing stained teeth. "All of the above, darling." plus putting down a traitorous bitch interfering with progress. Nothing personal. He sighted down the barrel before he could squeeze the trigger. One impatient man beside him fired the bullet, ricocheting wildly near her head with a terrifying whing. Seeing the unstable rock face, Hannah made a split-second decision, spurring the terrified mare not towards them, but diagonally away from the shooters, directly towards the canyon wall opposite the loose rock pile. She drew her revolver, fired 3 quick shots into the base of the scree slope, aiming low, where the rock looked most precarious. A deep rumble grew to a deafening roar as tons of rock cascaded down, impacting precisely where Cutter's men were positioned near the entrance. They scattered wildly, shouting curses amidst the choking, blinding dust cloud. Hannah wheeled the mare, violently, galloped flat out through the swirling chaos, praying the avalanche blocked pursuit, at least temporarily. Escaped again, heart pounding like a war drum, fewer precious bullets left, and the chilling knowledge Cutter was now personally invested. He wouldn't give up. Days later, the relentless plains threw another trial. A ferocious blizzard descended with shocking speed, and the world a blinding vortex of white wind howled like a hungry wolf. Hannah shivered violently, weakened body starting to fail. The cold penetrating to her bones. Her injured leg throbbed mercilessly. Her faithful mare struggled through deepening drifts, collapsed beneath her breath, ragged then stilled. On foot, utterly exposed, she stumbled onward, driven by sheer will, and the tiny life within dehydration blurred her vision. Snow blindness stung her eyes. Hope dwindled to a flickering candle flame. The child within moved restlessly. "Hold on," she whispered raspily. Strength gave out. She collapsed near a hidden seep, spring darkness swirling at the edges of her vision. Her last conscious thought and the cruel irony escaping hired guns, only to die frozen and forgotten. Clutching the small wooden bird in her numb fingers, through the freezing haze, a figure resolved. Tall, lean, moving with quiet, watchful grace. Weathered bronze features, keen, assessing eyes, he knelt cautiously, examination swift but gentle, ragged breathing. Frost-nipped skin, the badly infected leg gash, the undeniable swell of advanced pregnancy. Matahota gray bear, known more fearfully amongst the Washichu as Red Elk. A Lakota warrior in self-imposed exile, haunted by battles lost, treaties broken, disillusioned, and wary of takers. His first instinct screamed avoidance. A hunted white woman meant trouble. Bluecoats, bounty hunters, Crane's thugs, yet something held him. The raw vulnerability, the palpable life stirring within her. The defiant flicker deep in eyes, already shadowed by death. He saw not the spy from the crude posters he'd seen tacked up near trading posts, but another creature pushed to the absolute brink. Against his survival instinct, against a history scarred by betrayal. He gently lifted her fragile form, turning towards the sanctuary of his hidden canyon refuge. "The spirits weave strange patterns," he murmured in Lakota, carrying her through the swirling snow. "Sending me a Washichu woman to save, when her own kind hunt her like a wounded wolf." He noticed the crude wooden bird clutched tightly in her frozen hand. A zinged kato, a little bluebird or sparrow. The canyon was a narrow, jagged slash in the earth. Virtually invisible from the plains, a natural fortress. A hidden spring fed defiant cottonwoods clinging to life. His camp was Spartan, functional, a sturdy lean-to against the rock face, a fire pit, essential gear. He laid Hannah gently on soft furs, tended her severe dehydration, with careful sips of snowmelt later, with rich broth. When Hannah finally opened her eyes, fully coherent, she recoiled in panic at the imposing Lakota warrior tending the fire. "Be still." Red Elk said his English, careful, deliberate. "You are safe here for now." "Why?" Hannah croaked, her throat dry. "Why help me?" She searched his impassive face. His expression remained largely unreadable, etched by hardship. But something flickered deep within his dark eyes. "Perhaps I ask myself the same question. A hint of dry humor touched his voice, surprising both of them. Perhaps I grow tired of only rabbits and coyotes for conversation. The unexpected jest startled a weak, involuntary laugh from her, which turned into a sharp grimace as pain lanced through her infected leg. The wound is angry. Red Elk observed, gently reapplying a pungent green poultice. It may yet require cleansing with fire, but you are stronger than you look. Little Sparrow, you fought the fever hard and won. Little Sparrow, she puzzled. His mouth quirked slightly. He gestured toward the wooden bird now resting beside her pallet. Zingt Kala, small bird but fierce spirit, survives when many fall. He checked the bandage. Rest now, heal questions can wait. Days bled into weeks. Within the sheltered canyon, Red Elk remained reserved, respectful, ensuring her needs were met with quiet efficiency. Fresh water, firewood, roasted game appeared unobtrusively. He disappeared for hours, sometimes days, scouting the plains, returning, sometimes with meat, sometimes with grim news, read from subtle signs, cold campfires, the tracks of shod horses moving purposefully west. Cutter's men still searched, relentless. They communicated sparsely at first, gestures, essential words forging a shared understanding, born of mutual peril and a nascent respect. As Hannah slowly regained strength, the child a constant growing presence within her, she watched Red Elk closely. She saw him tracing patterns on an old piece of tanned leather he kept carefully wrapped. A fleeting look of intense pain crossed his features before stoicism returned like a mask. One evening, helping mend his worn buckskin shirt near the fire, she found a tiny, intricately beaded amulet tucked inside a pouch he always wore. He caught her gaze, took it gently from her fingers, his touch conveying not anger, but profound sadness. It belonged to one who walked the star road too soon. He said softly, a rare sharing of personal grief that resonated deeply. Fragile trust formed slowly in the crucible of shared silence. Survival routines and unspoken understanding. And they call you Red Elk, she said another evening by the flickering fire and the flames casting long shadows that danced on the canyon walls. But when you carried me, I thought I heard something else. Mato. Mato Hota. He glanced at her sharply, surprised. She remembered through the haze of near death. Mato Hota. He confirmed after a moment's hesitation. Gray Bear, that is my true name. Red Elk is what the blue-coat soldiers called me. His fingers absently traced a faint scar on his forearm. They say I am dangerous, a renegade, because I refuse to stay on the barren lands where they forced my people. He taught her the Lakota word for bear, matho, showing her the nuance between the sounds. And do you refuse? Hannah asked quietly. A man locked in a cage is not a man. He replied simply, his gaze fixed on the hypnotic flames. A people starved and caged are not a people I choose. Freedom, I choose to remember what our lives were before the fences, before the lies. He looked across the fire, his eyes searching her face. Now you tell me. Why does a powerful senator, a man with many friends, many guns, hunt one lone schoolteacher carrying a child? What makes Little Sparrow so dangerous to the great spider? Her hand instinctively went to her swelling abdomen. The story came haltingly at first, dredged from trauma and fear, then spilled out Crane's brutal assault, the resulting pregnancy, his callous dismissal, the deadly threats, the fabricated posters. Red Elk listened in utter silence, his face an impassive mask. When she finished, her voice trembling, shame burning her cheeks, she expected judgment, disgust, suspicion. Instead, he nodded slowly, his expression grim, but filled with a weary understanding. The spider weaves a wide web indeed, he said, his voice low, resonant with old bitterness. Catches many flies, blinds them with silver threads. This crane, I know his name. He has tangled many lives in his deceit. You know of him? She asked, surprised. His expression darkened further, his eyes reflecting the firelight, like obsidian chips. All Lakota know Crane, his words are sweet like summer honey. His promise is bright like the midday sun. Behind the smile, there is always death, always broken treaties, always more ancestral land stolen for his iron horse. He stared into the fire, lost in a painful memory. My own brother, Joaquin Yang Changku, Lightning Path, believed Crane's words once, trusted a promise whispered in a council tent. Now he sleeps forever beneath the prairie grass because of him. The quiet grief was profound, made more potent by the hint of loss he'd shared earlier with the amulet. One evening, feeling stronger, Hannah rearranged supplies near the back of the shallow cave they used for shelter. Her hand brushed against a loose stone near the ground. Curiosity piqued. She worked it free, revealing a small, dark cavity. Her heart pounded with inexplicable anticipation. Inside, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, lay a heavy leather-bound ledger. The pages were brittle, the ink faded but mostly legible. It wasn't Red Elk's script. The handwriting was educated, meticulously neat, sickeningly, chillingly familiar. Crane's precise script. Turning the fragile pages carefully, her blood ran cold. The ledger detailed shadowy transactions, clandestine land acquisitions, stretching back decades. Names, dates, coded references, tribal lands, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho territories supposedly protected by federal treaties, systematically illegally transferred through a web of dummy corporations and bribed officials, all tracing directly back to Senator Aldous Crane. It meticulously listed cash payments to specific contract doctors near reservations, cross-referenced with lists of Native women's names. Annotations beside some read, "Procedure complete. Subject sterilized successfully. Threat of propagation neutralized." Fragmented records detailed dozens of Native children forcibly transferred to distant boarding schools, severing them from families, language, and culture. Deliberate disappearances masked as benevolent assimilation, cultural eradication orchestrated for profit. Then nestled amongst financial records dated nearly 20 years prior. Notations of large, untraceable cash payments made to a specific doctor in the territorial capital. The payments coincided precisely with the time frame of the tragic riding accident that had claimed the life of Crane's first wife, a wealthy heiress, rumored to have discovered uncomfortable truths about her husband's burgeoning empire and his brutal methods. Had he silenced his own wife? This wasn't just corruption. It was Crane's secret history, a horrifying chronicle of monstrous crimes stretching back years, committed against the very people he publicly claimed to be civilizing. Systemic land theft, calculated cultural destruction, coerced sterilizations, stolen children, and quite possibly spousal murder, hidden by someone else. Crane had likely silenced someone who knew the truth, perhaps sought refuge here. Red Elk returned from scouting to find her numb with shock beside the cold fire pit, the damning ledger open on her lap, silent tears streaming down her face. He looked from the open book to her devastated expression. Bleak, weary understanding dawned slowly. He knew these terrible stories not from ledgers, but from whispered sorrows grieving families, the collective trauma etched onto the soul of his people. Now held in the trembling hands of this hunted Washichu woman was the white man's own irrefutable proof. The spider has been weaving his web for a very long time. Red Elk murmured, his voice low, vibrating with ancient, accumulated bitterness. Catching many flies, sometimes it seems even those closest to him within his own house. He looked directly at her, his gaze intense. The spirits choose strange messengers indeed, little sparrow. Perhaps they chose you for a reason. Where did you find this? Hannah asked, her fingers tracing the damning entries, feeling the sheer weight of the evil contained within. 2 winters passed. Red Elk replied, his eyes distant. I found a white man stumbling in a blizzard near death, not far from this Canyon Army uniform, old issue, no weapons. He was carrying many papers, this book among them, spoke wildly of Crane, of terrible secrets, of needing to make it right, before he died. Red Elk paused, remembering the dying man's desperate urgency. The snow took him before dawn. His last words were, "Truth, truth cannot die with me." He looked at the ledger. I kept his truth safe, though I could not read the strange markings. I sensed its dark power. The soldier's final words echoed her father's own principle, strengthening Hannah's resolve. The ledger forged their tentative alliance into a shared, dangerous purpose. Exposing Crane was no longer just about her survival. It was about justice for the countless victims documented in Crane's own meticulous hand. But how isolated, hunted, trapped, getting the evidence out seemed impossible. Red Elk knew only one potential conduit: Jacques Renaud, a respected, fiercely independent Métis courier, renowned for his discretion, speed, and knowledge of hidden trails, trusted cautiously on both sides of the cultural divide. It was a long shot fraught with peril, but perhaps their only chance. Using subtle messages relayed via sympathetic trappers, Red Elk arranged a clandestine meeting point, Standing Rocks. Not daring to risk the original ledger, yet Hannah spent painstaking hours meticulously copying the most damning pages, the sterilization payments linked to specific doctors and locations. The child transfer records naming schools and agencies, details of key illegal land grabs with falsified deeds. The crucial entries hinting ominously at his wife's death. She included a carefully worded letter, signed by her informing of Red Elk's first-hand knowledge of Crane's impact on the Lakota. It detailed the context of the ledger, their ongoing hunt, and the horrific scope of the crimes. It was addressed to a notoriously fearless Chicago investigative journalist. Red Elk knew from past treaty negotiations, a man known for exposing corruption at great personal risk. "This Renaud," Hannah said nervously as they prepared for the dangerous, multi-day journey, the copied pages and Red Elk's payment, a pouch heavy with prime beaver pelts, tucked securely. "Are you certain we can trust him?" Her pregnancy was prominent. Now limiting her pace, the travel on the spare horse agonizingly uncomfortable. Red Elk's face was impassive stone. Trust is a costly luxury, little sparrow one few can afford. But Renaud has no love for Crane or his railroad. Crane's men cheated his brother-in-law out of prime river-bottom land, and he added pragmatically, holding the small leather pouch that clinked softly. He values gold. Last season's prime pelts are worth something. Enough perhaps to buy his loyalty for this one task. The journey to Standing Rocks was fraught with palpable tension. Hannah's pregnancy made her vulnerable, slowing them, and they traveled mostly at night. Red Elk constantly scouting ahead, reading the subtle language of the land. Broken twigs, disturbed earth, the flight patterns of birds. With uncanny precision, always watching for pursuit. "You are quiet," Red Elk observed during a brief tense rest beneath a moonless sky. "Fear speaks loudly in your eyes tonight." Hannah rubbed her swollen belly absently. The child stirred within. "I keep thinking, what happens if we fail, if this doesn't work, if Crane can't be stopped?" Her voice caught on a knot of despair. "Then others will try after us," Red Elk said simply, his tone calm but firm. "The spider's web grows too large, too heavy with his greed. Eventually, inevitably, it breaks under its own weight. But how many more will suffer before that happens?" Hannah whispered, the faces conjured by the ledger flashing before her eyes. "How many more names will be added to his vile book? How many families destroyed your brother?" Red Elk was silent for a long moment, staring into the impenetrable darkness. "My grandmother had a saying," he said finally, his voice low. "Even the smallest stone tossed wisely causes ripples across the whole pond. We are small stones, perhaps, little sparrow, you and I, but ripples travel very far." They reached Standing Rocks and waited, concealed hope warring with gnawing fear. Days stretched into an agonizing week, then doubt festered. Crushing news arrived via a wary, tight-lipped fur trader. Red Elk cautiously approached Renault's body had been found washed up along the Missouri River. Miles downstream, his throat brutally cut, his wagon was discovered miles away. Burned to the axles, the trader mentioned offhand seeing Cutter's men near the river days earlier, seeming agitated, and had overheard Cutter complaining loudly about taking care of loose ends. Because the senator didn't tolerate complications. The journalist in Chicago received a small anonymous package shortly after a single spent bullet casing and a recent disturbing photograph of his 2 young children playing in their own yard. The unsigned note was chillingly brief: drop story, forget ledger, or they join the courier. Crane's reach was terrifyingly long, his methods utterly ruthless. Their fragile lifeline had been savagely severed. Failure weighed heavy, suffocating. Someone betrayed Renault. Hannah whispered, horror washing over her like icy water. Someone knew where to find him. Many eyes watch the trails these days, many mouths speak for coin or out of fear. Red Elk's face was a grim mask of stone. Crane knows we sent copies. He surely suspects we still possess the original. The hunt will intensify now. He will double his efforts. We must move Vanish deeper into the wilderness. But where is truly safe? Just as they were preparing to leave the vicinity of Standing Rocks, packing their meager supplies with heavy hearts, Hannah's sharp eyes caught an unnatural flicker of movement in the dense brush flanking the clearing. Red Elk! She whispered urgently, instinctively reaching for the revolver and pointing. He turned instantly, hand dropping to the knife at his belt. Too late, a shot cracked sharply across the clearing, echoing off the ancient rocks. Red Elk grunted, staggering back, clutching his shoulder, dark blood blossoming rapidly on his buckskin shirt. 4 riders burst aggressively from the tree-line, rifles raised and leveled. Hannah's heart plummeted sickeningly as she instantly recognized the leader. The very same fur trader who had delivered the grim news of Renault's murder. His face was now twisted into a greedy, triumphant grin. "Appreciate you 2 waiting so patient-like." The trader called out mockingly, his rifle aimed steadily at Red Elk. "Makes collecting the senator's very generous bounty that much easier. Smart bringing the Indian along. Double the reward." "You're working for Crane," Hannah said flatly, betrayal tasting like ash in her mouth. "You killed Renault. Work for whoever pays best, sweetheart." The trader shrugged, spitting tobacco juice. "And Senator Crane pays real generous for troublesome Lakota renegades and pretty spy women carrying dangerous secrets." His eyes narrowed greedily. "Now be sensible, hand over that ledger folks been whispering about, and maybe, just maybe, I'll make this quick for you." Red Elk, despite the shock and pain of the wound, moved with blinding, lethal speed. The knife he threw buried itself deep in the chest of the rider closest to him before the man could squeeze off a shot. The man gasped, eyes wide with shock, and crumpled silently from his saddle. Hannah, reacting on pure, desperate instinct, grabbed a burning branch from their hastily extinguished cook fire and flung it with all her might into a patch of dry, tinder-like brush near the trader's nervous horses. Flames caught instantly, leaping high with a terrifying whoosh. Chaos erupted, panicked, rearing horses whinnied in terror. Startled shouts came from the remaining men, and the acrid, choking smell of rapidly spreading wildfire smoke filled the air. In the swirling confusion, Red Elk seized Hannah's arm. "Run!" he commanded urgently, his voice tight with pain, pushing her hard towards a narrow, shadowed cleft between the towering sandstone cliffs behind them. "Into the rocks. Now I will follow." They fled into the darkness of the passage, bullets chipping stone dangerously close, whining like angry insects past their ears. Red Elk grimacing with pain, at each jarring movement but never faltering, led swiftly through a complex maze of narrow passages and hidden fissures he seemed to know by heart, perhaps by instinct. Behind them, the sounds of cursing sporadic gunfire and the roar of the growing fire gradually faded as the dense smoke and unfamiliar terrain slowed their pursuers. Your shoulder?" Hannah gasped when they finally paused, hidden deep within a sheltered, echoing rock hollow, her own breath tearing at her lungs. "Flesh wound." Red Elk grunted, his face pale and drawn beneath his weathered tan. "An arrow passed through in the same place years ago, an old friend." His eyes, however, held a hard, grim resolution. "But now we know for certain we cannot trust anyone. We cannot stay anywhere long." Crane's net tightens. Crane surely knew, or strongly suspected, they still possessed the original ledger. The hunt would intensify into a brutal, relentless pursuit across the territory. They had to keep moving, vanish deeper, become ghosts on the land. But where could they possibly find sanctuary? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm them completely, fate, or perhaps Providence, intervened once more. Days later, staggering through a desolate stretch of Badlands, their water almost gone, they spotted a mud-spattered, canvas-topped wagon, lumbering slowly into view, only to become firmly stuck axle-deep in a muddy wash ahead. The driver, a stout, bespectacled man, with ink stains on his fingers and cuffs, struggled futilely with the wagon, muttering curses as he strained against the stubborn mules, Elias Thorne, traveling photographer. Thorne nearly jumped out of his skin, letting out a startled yelp, when Hannah emerged cautiously from behind a cluster of rocks, looking thin, ragged, heavily pregnant. Followed closely by the imposing blood-stained figure of Red Elk Thorne. Immediately recognized Hannah's face, thinner now, etched with hardship and exhaustion, but still unmistakable from the stark wanted posters plastered across the territory. "Don't shoot," he stammered, dropping the mule reins and raising his trembling, ink-stained hands high in surrender. "Please, just a photographer on assignment. No money, no valuables." "We are not robbers," Hannah said wearily, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch Red Elk had fashioned for her. "Just perhaps if you help us get your wagon unstuck, you could spare a little water and we'll be on our way." Thorne's wide, terrified eyes darted nervously between them, lingering on Red Elk's crudely bandaged shoulder. Hannah's obvious pregnancy, the raw exhaustion radiating from them both, something flickered in his gaze. A dawning comprehension mixed with fear. You're her, the spy woman, from the posters." Hannah's heart sank like a stone. Here it comes, another betrayal. "Yes, I am, and no doubt you are thinking of the hefty reward Senator Crane is offering." To her utter astonishment, Thorne's round face crumpled, not with greed but with profound shame and self-loathing. "Reward, God, no, absolutely not." He passed a shaking hand over his sweating face. "Miss Miller, you don't understand. I know who you really are. I know what a monster Crane is." Hannah stiffened, exchanging a wary glance with Red Elk. What do you mean? How could you possibly know?" Thorne confessed, his words halting and choked at first, then tumbling out in a desperate, shame-fueled urgency. He explained he'd been hired months ago by Crane's Territorial Progress Committee to document the senator's triumphant, civilizing tour across the West. Propaganda, pure and simple. Glossy lies framed through his lens. I honestly thought the camera captured truth." He lamented, his voice breaking, tears welling. "Objective reality, turns out. I was framing his damned lies, making evil look respectable. A lens," he added bitterly, "can lie just as eloquently as any politician's tongue." He recounted horrors he'd witnessed from behind Crane's carefully constructed facade. He described Crane's private militia, men like Cutter, ruthless enforcers clearing designated treaty lands with brutal efficiency, far from public view. He recounted a recent incident near the Powder River, officially reported as a minor skirmish with hostile Indians. The reality, Thorne choked, wiping sweat with a trembling hand, was a calculated, cold-blooded massacre. Summoned by telegraph to photograph Senator Crane arriving on the scene. He stuttered, the memory overwhelming him. For publicity materials showing him restoring order, I arrived early, took a wrong turn, finding the command post, and I stumbled upon. He gagged suddenly, turning away and retching violently. Upon what, Mr. Thorne? Hannah pressed gently but firmly, though his ashen face and haunted eyes told her something terrible. Bodies. He whispered hoarsely, turning back his face pale and clammy. The aftermath, he hastily buried bodies. Lakota women, children, old men, already being unearthed by scavenging animals because the soldiers hadn't bothered to dig the graves deep enough. His voice cracked thick with remembered horror. Cutter was there. Overseeing the cleanup, laughing, I heard him laughing, said the hostile situation had been thoroughly pacified. Red Elk's face became a rigid mask of stone, unreadable, only the fierce intensity in his eyes, revealing the swirling vortex of rage and profound grief beneath. Thorne continued compulsively. He'd witnessed reservation midwives accused of promoting backward tribal practices, publicly humiliated their hair shorn, held up as warnings. He'd seen Hannah's spy poster, deliberately tacked up right beside standard bounty notices for common horse thieves, cynically conflating alleged political treason with ordinary crime, subtly implying her existence obstructed the progress that coveted the lands, ripe for railroad expansion. He called it manifest destiny. Thorne spat bitterness, etching his voice. What I saw, what I photographed, it was manifest evil. The casual systemic cruelty had sickened him to his core. Fearing for his safety, if he spoke out, yet increasingly unable to ignore the horrors he was professionally documenting. He had begun secretly taking unauthorized photographs, alongside the sanitized staged ones Crane demanded. Now trembling, he revealed a hidden false-bottomed compartment beneath his wagon floorboards. Inside lay stacks of carefully wrapped glass plate negatives, damning irrefutable visual proof. Images of militia brutality, the hastily buried victims at Powder River. The tangible fear on the faces of people confined to reservations, the sneering faces of Crane's men, looming over weeping families evicted from their ancestral homes. Images that starkly, viscerally corroborated the cold, bureaucratic evil detailed in Crane's own ledger. Not just pictures. Thorne set his hands, trembling visibly, as he lifted a heavy glass plate to the light, showing the heartbreaking image of a terrified child clinging to his mother. Evidence affidavits on glass. Each dated located in my private notes. Each a crime scene I was supposed to ignore, or worse, mask, with official promotional photographs. Then came the real shocker. A revelation that turned Hannah's remaining blood to ice water. Thorne swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. Initially, his face etched with profound self-loathing. Miss Miller, there's something else, truly monstrous. When Senator Crane initially hired me, it wasn't just for standard propaganda shots. He specifically instructed me quite explicitly, should the opportunity arise during my travels, to find you and to document. Well, he phrased it as documenting the final resolution of the unfortunate spy incident. For his private records, he said tangible proof, he called it, that the problem had been permanently handled. Thorne shuddered visibly, the memory making him pale. At first, I tried to tell myself maybe he just meant capturing you on film after an arrest, wishful thinking. But after Powder River, after seeing what Cutter and his men were capable of, I understood his real meaning. He wanted a trophy, a final grim image of his victory over you, photographic proof of your demise. The revelation struck Hannah like a physical blow. Thorne hadn't just stumbled upon them. Crane had tasked him with finding her body, anticipating her inevitable death, but witnessing the raw brutality of Crane's machine firsthand, particularly the Powder River massacre, had finally flipped Thorne's conscience, shattering his carefully constructed denial. I couldn't do it. Thorne whispered, his voice thick with shame and horror. I couldn't be part of that. I kept taking the secret pictures instead, risking everything. If I was found out, these negatives aren't just images. They are tangible evidence of his crimes. My testimony. The press credentials I still have. Whatever meager help I can offer. It's all yours if you'll have it. Suddenly, unexpectedly, their meager arsenal expanded dramatically. Not just the damning narrative meticulously laid out in Crane's ledger, but visceral, irrefutable visual proof coupled with Thorne's chilling insider testimony about Crane's calculated atrocities and his ultimate murderous intentions for Hannah herself. A new, incredibly audacious plan began to form in Hannah's mind. Desperate, fraught with extreme peril, but possibly, just possibly, their very last chance to expose Crane and achieve some measure of justice. Or, there's a telegraph. Thorne added suddenly, his eyes brightening with a flicker of desperate hope. Overheard some men talking yesterday at the trading post back east, Sister Agnes Moreau. The territorial governor's estranged, fiercely independent sister is leading a massive religious revival meeting in Dodge City next week. Thousands are expected to attend press coverage from newspapers as far away as Chicago, St. Louis. Sister Agnes. Hannah repeated thoughtfully, grasping the potential significance. The famous reformer, the one who constantly campaigns against government corruption and the mistreatment of the tribes, the one they call God's Hammer. Thorne nodded eagerly, seeing the spark of possibility in her eyes too. Exactly outspoken, absolutely fearless. Apparently even her powerful brother, the governor, can't control her or silence her. If anyone in this godforsaken territory would listen, would dare to act on this evidence, it would be Sister Agnes. And on that public stage in front of thousands of witnesses and the national press. Crane couldn't silence her or discredit us immediately without exposing himself completely. Hannah finished slowly, the first flicker of genuine, tangible hope warming her chest in months. Red Elk had remained silent throughout Thorne's revelations, studying the photographer with intense, unreadable eyes. Now he spoke, his voice low and resonant. "This man?" He asked Thorne directly, his gaze sharp. Does he still possess Crane's trust? Do Crane's men believe him still loyal? Thorne nodded hesitantly, looking uncomfortable. As far as they know, yes, I'm still officially documenting the senator's civilizing mission. No, I have legitimate press passes, credentials, letters of introduction signed by Crane's office. Then, Red Elk said, the barest hint of a grim, calculating smile touching his lips for the first time. We have a way in, a way past the Spider's watchers, a path to Dodge City. The plan began to take shape. Dangerous, desperate, requiring perfect timing and incredible luck, but offering a slender, unexpected chance for justice. But first, another shocking revelation delivered hesitantly by Thorne would shake their fragile newfound alliance to its very core. That night, making cold camp in a hidden wind-scoured ravine, using Thorne's wagon for shelter, the photographer grew increasingly agitated. He paced nervously back and forth beside the low fire, muttering disjointed phrases to himself, casting frequent guilty glances towards Hannah and Red Elk. There's something else. He finally blurted out, his voice strained, strangled by his conscience. Something I haven't told you. Something I recognized almost immediately. Hannah felt a cold chill of foreboding snake down her spine. Red Elk's hand moved imperceptibly closer to the hilt of the knife sheathed at his belt. I know who you are, Thorne said, looking directly, intensely at Red Elk. I know who you really are. Your true history. Red Elk's stoic expression didn't change, didn't even flicker, but something shifted deep in his dark eyes. A wariness honed by years of survival and betrayal. Explain yourself, photographer. Thorne drew a deep, shaking breath at the confession pouring out of him now. 2 years ago, before I ever worked for Crane. I was contracted directly by the War Department, a post-Civil War documentation project. My assignment was to document. He swallowed hard, finding the words difficult. To photograph the final surrender ceremonies of the last remaining hostile Lakota bands resisting reservation confinement. For the official historical record, they said. Hannah glanced uneasily between the two men, the air crackling with unspoken tension, thick like the lightning before a prairie storm. I was there, Fort Robinson, when they brought in the captured bands from the Northern Plains campaign, emaciated, defeated, but with proud defiance still in their eyes. I photographed them all for the archives, documenting the end of the Indian Wars, including Thorne's eyes fixed unwaveringly on Red Elk, including Matahota Gray Bear, Colonel Harrison's most wanted renegade leader, the warrior who had famously led a daring escape from the Sand Creek Reservation years earlier, vanished into legend, becoming a symbol of resistance. Red Elk said nothing, his face an unreadable mask carved from stone, his posture utterly still. But that's not all. Thorne continued, the words tumbling out now in a torrent of remembered detail. The man I photographed that day, the prisoner identified and documented as Matahota, he wasn't you. His build was similar, his features bore a resemblance, but his eyes were different. It was someone taking his place, someone deliberately sacrificing himself, allowing the real Matahota, the true leader, to escape. Hannah's breath caught sharply in her throat. She looked at Red Elk, searching his face. Is this true? Red Elk's gaze was distant, lost in the painful past. My younger brother, he said softly, his voice thick with long-buried grief, his hand instinctively touching the beaded amulet Hannah had noticed earlier. Wakingyang Chanku, Lightning Path, he was brave. He took my name, my identity upon himself. He allowed himself to be captured, so that I could escape, continue our people's struggle for freedom, keep the memory of our ways alive. And there's even more. Thorne said, his voice dropping to a haunted whisper, of the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place for him now with sickening clarity. I saw the military records later, internal communications. Do you know who personally intervened to ensure there was no formal trial, no lengthy appeals process, no outside witnesses permitted for the prisoner identified as Gray Bear, who insisted on a swift, decisive execution by hanging? A terrible, cold understanding dawned on Hannah. Connecting the dots laid out in Crane's own ledger, Crane Shiburham. She breathed the name, tasting like poison. Thorne nodded grimly, his face pale. Senator Aldous Crane. He was present at the fort. I saw him myself conferring with the colonel. He personally oversaw the execution. He even had me take photographs of the hanging. Restricted images, classified, never published, official documentation. He claimed. Red Elk's face remained like stone, but his eyes burned now with ancient, incandescent grief and a dawning, terrible rage. My brother died wearing my name. He said softly, each word heavy with loss, while Crane watched and documented his triumph. There's still more, Thorne said, seemingly unable to stop the flood of confessions now that the dam had broken. Something I only pieced together recently, fragments of conversations, overheard glimpses of Crane's private correspondence when he thought I wasn't looking. He took another deep breath, the final piece of the betrayal falling into place. Your people's desperate uprising 3 years ago, the one so brutally crushed and used as justification for the final reservation confinement. Crane deliberately engineered it. He paid his own men, likely Cutter's associates, to slaughter an isolated settler family down near Willow Creek, planting Lakota arrows at the scene afterward. He manufactured the outrage, created the unprovoked attack excuse he needed for the full military crackdown required to clear the land for his railroad interests. Red Elk went utterly unnervingly still, not even seeming to breathe, his knuckles white where his hand rested on his knife. And the devastating food shortages on the reservation the following winter. Thorn pressed relentlessly, the truth pouring out. The spoiled flour, the rancid meat shipments that killed so many elders and children through sickness and starvation. That was him too. He controlled the supply contracts, diverted good provisions, sold them elsewhere for immense profit. Replaced them with condemned military surplus, and pocketed the difference while your people starved. All documented. In secondary ledgers, I saw him burn with my own eyes. Stop, Red Elk said suddenly, his voice dangerously quiet, like cracking ice over a deep, cold river. Enough words, enough poison. He rose in one fluid, silent motion, turning his back to the fire, walking away into the darkness, a solitary, powerful silhouette against the star-dusted canvas of the night sky. Hannah watched him go, her heart aching with the weight of wounds she could barely comprehend, wounds Crane had deliberately, calculatedly inflicted. "Why didn't you tell us all this sooner?" she asked Thorn quietly, turning back to the shaken photographer. Thorn slumped, running a hand through his thinning hair. Because you needed to know the absolute depth of his evil before you face him. The true nature of the monster you're dealing with, and he hesitated, glancing nervously towards the darkness where Red Elk had disappeared. Frankly, Miss Miller, because I'm no longer certain Red Elk will stick to the plan of exposure once we reach Dodge City. Not now, not knowing the full personal truth about his brother's murder and Crane's orchestration of his people's suffering. I've seen that look in men's eyes before. The look of men who have absolutely nothing left to lose, but the quest for vengeance. Hannah shivered uncontrollably, despite the warmth radiating from the small fire. What? What do you think he'll do? Crane will be at the revival, Thorn said grimly. Center stage, basking in reflected righteousness, security or not, thousands of witnesses or not. If Red Elk decides he wants Crane dead that night. Thorn left the terrifying sentence unfinished, and the implication hanging heavy in the cold night air. Later, when Red Elk returned silently to the edge of the firelight, his face was once again an unreadable mask, his movements tightly controlled, deliberate. But something profound had shifted within him. A deadly stillness, a coiled intensity that hadn't been there before Hannah approached him cautiously, the precious ledger now bundled securely beside her. "Red Elk," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, "about your brother, about what Crane did. I am so deeply sorry." He didn't look at her immediately, his gaze fixed on the distant, flickering stars. "Justice takes many forms, little sparrow," he said finally, his voice distant, flat. "Some forms are quiet like the owl, others are loud like the thunder." She instinctively reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. The buckskin felt cold beneath her fingers. "We need to expose him, his crimes to everyone. Killing him now will only make him a martyr in the eyes of some. They'll hang you silence. Thorn, bury the ledger and photos forever. All the truth, all the suffering of your people, your brother's sacrifice. It will all be buried with Crane, if you seek only vengeance." There was a long, tense moment where he said nothing, the silence stretching thick with unspoken possibilities, and slowly, deliberately, he turned his face to hers, his dark eyes meeting hers in the firelight. "My people have a word," he said, his voice regaining some of its quiet resonance. "Wani Changyeng, Mies. It means to live again, to seek renewal after great loss. Sometimes living, enduring, bearing witness is a harder, colder revenge than the quick release of dying." A flicker, the barest ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it didn't reach his haunted eyes. Perhaps watching the great spider fall tangled and broken in his own carefully woven web is a better, more lasting victory than a quick knife thrust in the dark. Relief flooded Hannah so potent it almost made her knees buckle. But studying his face in the dancing firelight, seeing the depths of pain still swirling beneath the surface calm, she wasn't entirely convinced that justice, and not raw personal vengeance, would ultimately guide his hand when they finally stood face to face with Aldous Crane. The edge remained sharply dangerous. The final leg of the journey southeast toward Dodge City was a nerve-shredding ordeal undertaken in grim silence. They traveled mostly under the cloak of darkness, skirting settlements, following obscure forgotten trails known only to Red Elk. Thorn's unassuming canvas-topped wagon provided meager cover for Hannah, now visibly heavily pregnant. The constant jolting of the rough journey, an agony she endured through sheer willpower, clutching the precious ledger protectively. The life growing within her, a persistent, powerful motivation for survival. Close calls frayed their already raw nerves to the breaking point. Near the muddy Cimarron River, they hid breathlessly, hearts pounding amongst dense, thorny bushes, as a heavily armed militia patrol passed mere yards away. Cutter's scarred, hateful face, clearly visible among them, his harsh laughter about the pesky spy bitch and the worthless Indian, echoing cruelly in the still air. Thorn, sweating profusely but managing outward calm, bluffed his way past suspicious railroad agents patrolling newly seized Kiowa land, using his increasingly expired-looking credentials and nervous, cheerful banter. At a makeshift checkpoint near a small, wary settlement facing nervous local deputies, focusing intently on Red Elk's stoic figure, Thorn created a desperate diversion. Pretending to adjust his cumbersome camera setup, he accidentally ignited a pouch of magnesium flash powder. The sudden blinding white flare, accompanying the loud bang, startled deputies and horses alike, creating precious seconds of chaos. Red Elk seized the opportunity, urging the wagon forward, crashing through the flimsy barricade as Thorn scrambled frantically aboard. It was wildly risky, reckless even. But it worked. They vanished into the dust before the stunned deputies could react. The relentless stress, poor food, constant movement, and lack of restorative sleep took a heavy toll, especially on Hannah. She grew paler, weaker by the day. Her improperly healed leg wound festered again, throbbing incessantly, weeping pus, despite Red Elk's herbal poultices, a constant agonizing reminder of the violence nipping relentlessly at their heels. The fever returned insidious and draining. Then just 2 days out from Dodge City, the unforgiving plains through one final brutal trial, another blizzard descended with shocking, terrifying speed. Blinding white obliterated the horizon within minutes. The wind howled like a banshee across the featureless landscape, driving snow horizontally. Hannah, shivering violently, despite being wrapped in every spare blanket they possessed, felt her already weakened body finally failing. Succumbing to the raging fever and the penetrating cold, Red Elk, ever vigilant, his eyes scanning the white chaos, found a shallow cave beneath a snow-heavy limestone ridge. Barely adequate shelter, but infinitely better than freezing to death exposed on the open plain. They huddled inside, the wind's deafening roar, outside muffling other sounds, creating a false sense of security. Hannah's leg throbbed mercilessly, the infection seemingly inflamed by the penetrating, bone-chilling cold. The child within kicked weakly, a faint, desperate reminder of what she fought for. They did not stop with the storm. Red Elk stated quietly, his breath misting heavily in the frigid air. He had seen fresh tracks, shod horses moving fast deliberately, trying to obscure their trail. Not far back before the worst of the whiteout hit Cutter's men, relentless. "We could die out here." Thorn stammered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably despite his thick coat. "Frozen solid, all of us." "No," Red Elk responded with calm, quiet certainty, his eyes meeting Hannah's hazy gaze. "Little Sparrow will not die today. Not before the spider sees her face again." Hours passed in freezing, heightened tension. Hannah drifted in and out of fevered consciousness, plagued by disjointed nightmares. Through her delirium, she dimly heard Red Elk suddenly stiffen beside her, holding up a hand for absolute silence. Through the blizzard's incessant whine, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of strained voices, the snorting of struggling horses disturbingly nearby. Getting closer, vague figures emerged like phantoms from the whiteout, battling the elements. Cutter and his two remaining hard cases, seeking the very same minimal shelter the rocky ridge offered. Blinded by the swirling snow, and they hadn't spotted the low cave entrance yet, huddling miserably against the exposed rock face mere yards away. Cursing the weather, Crane and their bad luck. He knows we came this way. Red Elk whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind, his eyes glinting hard like flint in the dim light. They will wait out the worst of the storm, and then search this entire ridge systematically, trapped, exposed if they tried to move, inevitably caught if they stayed. Hannah clutched the precious ledger tighter, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird beating its wings against cage bars. Cutter's coarse voice drifted on the wind, harsh and cruel, complaining loudly about the freezing cold and overdue reward money. When I finally get my hands on that bitch. The brutal words carried clearly into the cave. Make her wish she'd stayed put and taken the senator's first offer back in the city. Crane pays extra for making examples last. One of his men let out a harsh bark of laughter. What about the damned Indian with her? Him a bullet's too quick, too good for his kind. Cutter snarled. Maybe take his scalp for old time's sake. Be worth something back east. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Hannah deeper than the howling wind. Escape seemed utterly hopelessly impossible. Their luck had finally run out. Red Elk shifted silently, positioning himself near the narrow cave mouth, his hand resting almost casually near the heavy knife at his belt, his gaze locked intently on the vague shapes huddled just outside, calculating the impossible odds, waiting for an opening, any opening. Thorne huddled miserably at the back of the small cave, suddenly fumbled urgently inside his large camera bag. I have an idea. He whispered urgently, his voice trembling with cold. Perhaps fear, but also resolve. Incredibly dangerous. Likely fatal for me. He withdrew a tightly sealed package of flash powder and several small stoppered bottles containing volatile chemicals used for developing plates in the field. Magnesium powder, extremely flammable, almost explosive if contained. If I can mix a charge, create a significant distraction, a large flash, maybe even a small explosion, you two might be able to slip away during the confusion. And what about you? Hannah asked, her voice weak but firm. Thorne attempted a shaky smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Someone has to stay behind to light the fuse, Miss Miller. His gaze was surprisingly steady. Red Elk studied him for a long moment, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. A brave plan, photographer, but the storm still rages. You would not make 10 yards alone afterwards. I don't need to make it, Thorne replied simply, his voice resolute. I just need to buy you enough time. Slow them down long enough for you to get Hannah and that ledger to Dodge City. The truth, those photographs they have to get through, nothing else matters anymore. Before they could argue further, fate intervened again. One of Cutter's men, complaining loudly about needing to relieve himself, broke away from the huddled group, staggering directly towards the hidden cave entrance, seeking shelter from the wind. In seconds, he would stumble upon them. Discovery was imminent. Red Elk moved with utterly silent, deadly speed, flowing like a shadow, detaching himself from the deeper shadows within the cave. The man fumbling with his trousers never saw him coming. A calloused hand clamped vice-like over his mouth. Stifling a surprised cry, Red Elk's knife flashed once, twice, clinically efficient in the dim light. The man sagged instantly, without a sound. Red Elk lowered the heavy body silently onto the snow-covered ground just inside the entrance, then quickly, silently dragged it further into the cave's concealing darkness. Won't be long before Cutter notices he's missing. Thorn whispered urgently, his eyes wide with the shock and grim reality of the situation. Red Elk nodded grimly, already stripping the dead man's thick coat and wide-brimmed hat. "I will buy the time you need," he said, his voice low and decisive, as he donned the dead man's outer clothing over his own. "I will draw them away from here into the storm. You take Little Sparrow south as soon as they follow. Follow the ridge line down. Don't stop for anything." "No," Hannah protested weakly, struggling to sit up. "Red Elk, you can't. You'll die out there. Cutter will hunt you down." Red Elk turned, meeting her gaze for a long moment, his eyes holding hers with a depth of understanding that transcended words. "A man lives until the moment he dies, Little Sparrow," he said, simply echoing an old Lakota sentiment. Nothing less, nothing more. Adjusting the unfamiliar hat low over his brow, he moved to the cave entrance. "Wait for my signal. Listen for the pursuit. When they follow me away from this ridge, go south, quickly." Before either Hannah or Thorn could respond further, he slipped out into the swirling white chaos, minutes stretched into an eternity. Each tick of Thorn's pocket watch sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Then a sharp shout echoed from the direction of Cutter's remaining group, followed by angry cursing and the sounds of nervous horses being hastily mounted. A rifle shot cracked sharply, followed by another, moments later seemingly further away. Red Elk had successfully drawn them away into the teeth of the blizzard. "Now," Thorn urged gently but firmly, helping Hannah to her feet. "He bought us our chance. We have to go now." The blizzard's unrelenting fury had begun to abate slightly, visibility improving marginally. But the deep snow and swirling wind still offered crucial cover for their desperate escape. They staggered south along the base of the ridge, Hannah leaning heavily on Thorn, every agonizing step sending jolts of pain up her inflamed leg. Behind them, further off, now more sporadic shots rang out, growing fainter, more distant. "He's leading them in circles," Thorn realized aloud, glancing back nervously. "Using the storm, the terrain, deliberately confusing them. Will he find us again?" Hannah asked, her breath coming in painful, shallow gasps, clinging to Thorn for support. Thorn didn't answer immediately, focusing instead on keeping them moving relentlessly southwards through the thigh-deep snowdrifts. The unspoken, terrifying truth hung heavy in the cold air between them. Red Elk had almost certainly sacrificed himself to give them one desperate chance of reaching Dodge City. Hours passed in a grueling, exhausting progression south. The storm finally began to lift as dusk painted the western sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, revealing a stark, transformed landscape buried under a thick blanket of fresh snow. Stumbling with exhaustion, they found improbable shelter in a dilapidated, long-abandoned line shack, its door frozen shut. Thorn managed to break the rusted latch with the butt of his heavy pistol. Inside was freezing cold, but blessedly dry, and there were enough scraps of weathered wood scattered about for Thorn to coax a small, smoky fire to life. Thorn tended to Hannah's leg as best he could, his touch surprisingly gentle. He cleaned the angry, weeping wound with snow melted over the meager fire, and carefully applied a fresh poultice of the potent herbs Red Elk had given them before leaving the canyon. Exhaustion finally claimed Hannah completely. She drifted into a deep, fever-haunted sleep, her worn-out body finally surrendering to the infection and fatigue that had been relentlessly building for days. She awoke sometime later to the sound of hushed voices nearby. Blinking her eyes open, struggling against the heavy fog of fever and sleep, she saw an impossible, unbelievable sight. Red Elk alive, silhouetted against the flickering firelight, blood staining the borrowed coat, but standing upright, speaking quietly, with a relieved Thorn. "Red Elk," she whispered, wondering if the fever had finally conjured a comforting hallucination. He turned at the sound of her voice, the ghost of a rare, genuine smile touching his weary lips. "Little Sparrow wakes," He said, his voice rough but blessedly real. Good, good, still far to go before sunrise. But Cutter, his men. The storm claimed one more of his men. Red Elk reported grimly, froze solid after his horse broke its leg. The other lost his nerve, turned back towards the settlements. Cutter still hunts, driven by hate and Crane's money. But he is alone now, and blind. I led him far off the trail, then lost him in the snowfields to the north. He indicated a fresh blood-stained tear in the buckskin sleeve beneath the coat. His last bullet merely grazed my arm, a small price. His eyes met hers, dark and intense. I lived to see the spider fall from his web. Little sparrow. Profound relief washed over Hannah, so potent it brought fresh tears to her eyes, followed immediately by a surge of renewed fierce determination. They had survived, improbably, miraculously, against all odds. Still somehow lay the path to Dodge City. Sister Agnes justice. But the margin of survival was terrifyingly razor-thin. And Cutter, wounded perhaps, but undoubtedly enraged and still dangerous, remained somewhere out there on their trail, as relentless and deadly as the unforgiving winter landscape itself. Dodge City assaulted the senses after the desolate plains, a chaotic symphony of dust, noise, the sharp smells of coal smoke from the nearby rail yards, cheap perfume, stale beer, and livestock. The air buzzed with the raw energy of swaggering cowboys, flush with cattle drive pay, hopeful farmers seeking new beginnings, rough-looking railroad workers, furtive gamblers, and fortune-seekers drawn like moths to a flickering flame. Dominating the dusty edge of town, stark white against the bruised colors of the setting sun, stood the massive canvas revival tent, pulsating with the fervent sound of thousands of voices, raised in hymns and prayers, vibrating with anticipation. For Sister Agnes Moreau, the plan hatched in desperate whispers during the final arduous miles was simple, but extraordinarily perilous. Thorne, armed with his legitimate press credentials and bulky camera equipment, would use the cover of a journalist, documenting the revival for Eastern newspapers, to get as close to the main stage as possible. Hannah, visibly pregnant, weakened by her ordeal, and fever barely able to stand, unassisted, would remain hidden beneath a heavy tarp in the back of Thorne's wagon, parked strategically nearby, until the critical moment. Red Elk, instantly recognizable and undoubtedly a target himself, his face likely known from older military dispatches, if not the recent wanted notices alongside Hannah's, would remain unseen in the deep shadows between buildings, watching for Cutter, ready to create a diversion outside the tent, if absolutely necessary. Remember, Thorne reiterated nervously, making final preparations as dusk gathered, his fingers fumbling as he adjusted his camera lenses for the third time. Sister Agnes speaks last tonight, the grand finale. That's our only window, not a second before. Hannah nodded grimly, clutching the precious ledger, now wrapped securely in oilcloth and hidden beneath her shawl. Her leg throbbed, but adrenaline masked the worst of the pain. And Crane, are you certain he's here? Front row center. Thorne confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. Confirmed it myself earlier, seated right beside the governor and other territorial dignitaries. Smug as ever, never misses a public opportunity to be seen associating with the righteous. Red Elk's face remained impassive, etched with stoicism, but his dark eyes burned with a dangerous, coiled intensity Hannah hadn't seen before. The knowledge of Crane's betrayal of his brother simmered just beneath the surface. I will watch for Cutter, he stated quietly, his gaze sweeping the crowded street, bustling toward the entrance of the tent. He is close. I can feel his presence on the wind. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife. The plan nearly unraveled before it even began. At the main entrance to the massive revival tent, volunteer ushers flanked by several stern-faced territory marshals were checking attendees far more thoroughly than Thorne had anticipated. One marshal stood beside the church volunteers, his sharp eyes scrutinizing credentials, occasionally asking pointed questions, his gaze sweeping the faces of those entering. They're looking specifically for us. Thorn whispered urgently, pulling back slightly into the shadows, panic edging his voice. Someone must have warned them, sent a telegraph ahead. Hidden beneath the suffocating tarp in the nearby wagon. Hannah felt cold despair claw at her throat. So agonizingly close, yet potentially still beyond reach. Red Elk melting seamlessly into the deep indigo shadows between two false-fronted buildings across the street, surveyed the heightened security situation. His eyes narrowed, taking in the scene with lightning calculation. Need a bigger distraction, he muttered under his breath. His gaze fell upon a long row of horses hitched carelessly outside a noisy saloon just down the street. A new plan formed instantly in his mind, incredibly risky, but potentially effective. Minutes later, a sudden violent commotion erupted at the far end of the dusty main street. Half a dozen horses suddenly broke free from their hitching posts, stampeding wildly down the thoroughfare in a panicked, thundering flight, scattering pedestrians. Men shouted curses, women screamed, and nearly the entire security contingent at the revival tent entrance, marshals and volunteers alike, instinctively rushed down the street to help contain the dangerous chaos, leaving the entrance momentarily unattended. Now, Thorn hissed quickly, helping the trembling but resolute Hannah from her hiding place in the wagon. Keeping her head down, blending into the surge of distracted onlookers moving towards the commotion, when they hurried towards the massive tent, slipping quickly through the temporarily unguarded main entrance amidst the confusion. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Thousands of souls packed shoulder to shoulder, their voices raised in a fervent hymn, the air thick with emotion, piety, and raw expectation. Getting anywhere near the brightly lit stage was controlled chaos. Security inside, mainly stern-faced church volunteers and the few marshals who hadn't rushed outside, worked to keep the surging throng back from the dignitaries' seating area and the stage steps. As planned, Thorn used his bulky camera as justification, pushing determinedly forward, loudly, claiming he needed better angles for photographs for the Chicago Tribune. Hannah followed closely in his wake, her face partially concealed by a borrowed drab shawl. The precious ledger clutched tightly, protectively beneath it, her heart hammering against her ribs. They were almost in position near the side steps, breathing heavily, when Hannah spotted him, across the sea of shifting bodies positioned strategically near the base of the steps, leading up to the stage, coolly scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. Cutter, her blood turned instantly to ice water in her veins. How could he possibly have found them again so quickly? His scarred face looked leaner, harder, more dangerous than before. The jagged scar tissue livid white against his wind-burned skin. He hadn't seen them yet. Thorn, she whispered urgently, grabbing his arm, her voice barely audible above the din of the hymns. Cutter's here by the stage steps. Look. Thorn followed her terrified gaze, his face draining instantly of all color. Damn him. We need to move. Now circle around the other way, before he sees us. They changed course abruptly, trying to melt back into the dense crowd, pushing laboriously through the packed bodies towards the opposite side of the sprawling stage. On the platform above a series of impassioned speakers were warming up the massive crowd. Very soon, Sister Agnes Moreau herself would take the stage for the culmination of the revival service. They absolutely had to be in position before then. Suddenly, Cutter's relentless gaze swept past Hannah, then snapped back sharply, locking onto her face with brutal instant recognition across the heads of the crowd. A look of savage, visceral triumph crossed his scarred features. He immediately started moving purposefully towards her, shoving people aside. Roughly, his eyes fixed on her like a wolf sighting cornered prey. Been waiting a long time for this spy bitch. His rough voice carried faintly above the hymns. Hannah stumbled, shoved back by the recoiling crowd, as Cutter carved a path toward her. He gained ground rapidly. Thorn tried pulling her towards a side exit, but the press of bodies was too great. Panic surged. They were trapped. Cutter grinned, closing the gap, his hand reaching inside his coat. Hannah could almost feel the cold metal of a gun barrel aimed her way. This is it, She thought terror washing over her. Then a slight commotion near the stage steps. The young clerk, Thomas Crane's aide from the hotel, looking pale but determined, suddenly stepped forward as Cutter brushed past Thomas, accidentally. Jostled Cutter's arm sharply just as the man drew his pistol, causing the weapon to clatter harmlessly onto the packed earth floor. "So sorry, sir." Thomas stammered, feigning clumsiness, momentarily blocking Cutter's path with his body. It was the barest flicker of a chance. Cutter snarled, fumbling to recover his weapon. Momentarily distracted, fueled by a potent cocktail of adrenaline, terror, and fierce maternal desperation, Hannah broke away abruptly from Thorne's steadying hand. Instead of attempting to flee into the impossible crush of people, she did the utterly unthinkable. She shoved past startled onlookers scrambling directly towards the steps leading up to the brightly lit stage. "Stop her! Grab that woman!" Cutter bellowed furiously, finally retrieving his gun, his face contorted with rage. Ignoring Thorne's urgent whispered calls, ignoring the shouts, Hannah lurched forward onto the platform, stumbling past the startled aides standing near the pulpit. She didn't just collapse from exhaustion. She deliberately threw herself dramatically, desperately, at the foot of the sturdy altar table directly before the stunned Sister Agnes. Landing in a heap just as Cutter reached the top of the steps, blocked momentarily by her sudden prostrate arrival and the protective circle forming around her. The oilcloth-wrapped ledger and Thorne's secreted glass plate negatives were clutched tightly, talismanically, in her outstretched hand. Thomas, standing near the steps, quickly and discreetly pressed a folded piece of paper, looking like official letterhead, into Sister Agnes's hand as she reached for the bundle Hannah offered. A collective gasp rippled through the suddenly silent thousands, her obvious exhaustion. The dark blossoming bloodstain spreading rapidly on her worn dress from her reopened leg. Wound her heavily pregnant state starkly visible under the harsh lights, the sheer drama of her desperate act. Cutter cursed viciously, trying to shove past an aghast gray-suited aide blocking his path. "She's a wanted criminal," he shouted loudly, trying to regain control of the narrative. "A dangerous Confederate spy. Arrest her immediately." "Sister," Hannah whispered, her voice ragged, raspy, but somehow penetrating the sudden shocked hush that had fallen over the entire assembly. "The truth, please, for God's justice, Senator Crane." She thrust the heavy bundle ledger and negatives into the preacher's automatically outstretched hand, just as the darkness swirling at the edges of her vision threatened to finally claim consciousness. "This woman needs immediate medical attention." Sister Agnes commanded instantly, her authoritative voice cutting through the confusion, brooking no argument whatsoever. She gestured sharply, and two women aides moved quickly to Hannah's side, shielding her protectively. Cutter finally managed to shove his way fully onto the stage, his face suffused with fury. "That woman is under arrest by direct order of Senator Crane with the full authority of this territory," he bellowed, reaching for Hannah. Sister Agnes fixed him with a withering, fearless stare that stopped him cold. "This woman is under God's divine protection in his house, sir," she declared firmly, her voice ringing with conviction. "As indeed am I, while I examine precisely what has been brought before this congregation, before God." The effect on the massive crowd was electric palpable. Sister Agnes stared momentarily stunned at the collapsed woman before her, then carefully unwrapped and opened the heavy ledger, her eyes quickly scanning the meticulous entries. She unfolded the paper Thomas had given her. A brief signed order from Crane himself, explicitly demanding Cutter resolve the Miller situation permanently. No witnesses. Her eyes then went to Thorne's glass plates, holding one up towards the light. Her face visibly paled as her eyes flew across the horrific images revealed the stark photos of brutalized victims, the hastily buried bodies at Powder River, clear evidence of a massacre. She flipped through more pages of the ledger, names locations, the cold bureaucratic language documenting systemic corruption, forced sterilization quotas, lists of stolen children sent far away. The crowd watched, breathless, in utter silence. Reporters near the front scrambled, scribbling frantically in their notebooks. Outside the tent, the urgent chattering of telegraph keys began, almost immediately transmitting the sensational unfolding interruption to newspapers across the nation. In the front row of dignitaries, Senator Aldous Crane surged abruptly to his feet, his face a tight mask of controlled public outrage. "Sister Agnes," he called out, his powerful politician's voice carrying easily across the hushed tent. "I must strenuously protest this unseemly interruption. This woman is a known agitator, a fugitive from justice, a proven liar and criminal. Whatever desperate falsehoods she has presented you." Falsehoods. Sister Agnes's voice cut through his manufactured indignation like a razor-sharp knife through silk. She held up one of Thorne's most damning photographs, a clear, brutal image of a young Lakota woman's discarded body lying near a military field hospital tent after a documented sterilization. Procedure had clearly gone terribly wrong, and the official U.S. Army markings on the tent starkly, undeniably visible. Is this a falsehood, Senator, with your authorizing signature clearly visible accompanying the official directive to document the entire medical program? She turned another damning page in Crane's own ledger, or perhaps these detailed records of substantial payments funneled directly into your private bank accounts from the sale of lands belonging legally to the Cheyenne people by sacred federal treaty. Are these meticulously recorded figures falsehoods as well, Senator Crane? What about these notes concerning your first wife's untimely death? Or this explicit order to have this woman killed? She finished holding up the paper Thomas had provided. Crane's face drained instantly, dramatically, of all color. He looked suddenly older, cornered, the mask shattering completely. Beside him, the territorial governor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting nervously, already visibly calculating the immense political cost of continued association with the senator's sister Agnes, raised her head, her own face pale, but set in steely, unwavering resolve. She looked out intently at the thousands of watching faces holding the incriminating ledger and the horrific photograph high for all to see. Her voice rang out clear, strong, trembling now, with righteous, undeniable fury. There are insidious forces of darkness dwelling amongst us, masquerading as beacons of light, as champions of progress. I hold in my hands, this day, undeniable proof. Proof of profound wickedness in the highest places. Proof of unimaginable suffering inflicted upon the most innocent and vulnerable among us. She didn't name Crane directly again. She didn't need to. The accusation hung heavy and unavoidable in the supercharged air. This brave woman. She continued, gesturing towards Hannah, now gently tended by aides, conscious but weak, has risked everything she has, her life, her freedom, the life of her unborn child, to bring us this terrible truth, a truth that powerful, corrupt men kill and have killed to keep hidden. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs, the whispers growing into an outraged roar. Reporters scribbled even more frantically. In the ensuing confusion near the stage, Elias Thorne managed to reach the platform, his camera now conspicuously, deliberately documenting the historic unfolding moment. Sister Agnes confronting blatant corruption head-on. Hannah being tended as a wounded martyr, the governor's visibly shocked face, the stunned expressions of the other dignitaries, and most damning of all, Senator Aldous Crane's naked, cornered rage. Crane, his eyes wild, suddenly lunged forward towards the stage, shoving aside a stunned aide reaching frantically inside his tailored coat. "This treason ends now," he roared, his voice cracking with fury and desperation. A single deafening shot rang out, echoing sharply through the cavernous tent. Women screamed, men ducked instinctively. But Senator Crane staggered, a dark red bloom suddenly spreading rapidly across the front of his immaculate white shirt front. He looked down at his chest in shocked surprise. Then his knees buckled, and he crumpled heavily onto the stage floor. All eyes instinctively turned towards the source of the unexpected shot. Standing near the back of the tent near an exit flap was Cutter, a smoking pistol still raised. His scarred face was twisted into a bizarre, chilling grimace of betrayal, fury, and perhaps grim satisfaction. "You promised me." Cutter screamed across the stunned silence at the fallen, groaning senator. "I promised we'd all be protected, said there'd be no loose ends, promised me wealth, you lying double-crossing bastard." He raised the pistol again, aiming it at Crane's prone form. But before he could fire a second fatal shot, several marshals recovering from the initial shock tackled him violently to the ground, disarming him. Pandemonium immediately erupted. Shouting confusion marshals securing Cutter aides rushing to Crane's side. Few, if any, noticed a lone, impassive Lakota figure, slipping silently, unnoticed from the edge of the tent, melting back into the concealing darkness outside his brother's ghost, perhaps finally finding some measure of peace. Long-sought justice served without him ever having to draw his own knife. The spider, just as Red Elk had grimly predicted, was irrevocably destroyed, tangled in the broken threads of his own vast, venomous web. In the aftermath, Hannah gave birth to a daughter whom she named Hope. Thorne's harrowing photographs, Crane's own ledger, and Thomas's crucial piece of corroborating evidence became the damning centerpieces of a sweeping Senate investigation that utterly shattered Crane's political legacy and exposed deep corruption reaching into multiple branches of government and territorial administration. True justice for his countless, often nameless victims remained an elusive, imperfect thing. Some laws were cautiously amended, a few lower officials were quietly removed, scapegoated, but the relentless engine of progress and profit continued its march, grinding forward over treaties and lives. Weeks later, finding temporary sanctuary, Hannah stood by a small window in a quiet room provided through Sister Agnes's discreet church network, holding Hope bathed in the clean morning light. The world outside was still vast, still potentially dangerous, and the whispers about the spy woman hadn't entirely vanished, merely quieted. Thorne entered softly. A message arrived, "For you from him." He handed her a small, intricately carved wooden sparrow, identical to the one she had clutched desperately in the blizzard. Tucked carefully beneath it, almost hidden, lay a single perfect eagle feather. Hannah clutched the smooth carving, warm tears blurring her vision. She looked down at Hope, asleep in her arms. Tiny and perfect Red Elk was gone. Returned to the wild hidden places, perhaps seeking his own difficult path to Wanichungyang renewal. His sacrifice. His presence felt both achingly distant and incredibly near. His parting gift spoke volumes across the silence. A testament to endurance, a whisper of shared resilience. "He wants us to remember." Hannah whispered softly, touching the sparrow's smooth wood, then the powerful lightness of the eagle feather, feeling their symbolic weight. That even after the deepest winter life finds a way. That resilience comes in many forms, strong, like the eagle, fierce like the sparrow. Hope stirred tiny fingers instinctively curling around Hannah's own. A new life, a new beginning. Another small ripple starting its journey outward across the vast, uncertain pond of the future, fragile, but undeniably present, carrying within it the weight of the past and the possibility of change.